Cam here from Xano Support, and today we're going to be going over request history. What is it? How do you manage it? And how do you archive it long-term if needed? So let's go ahead and hop in and see what we can do. So what is request history? Well, request history is just recorded information of a particular action. It's your endpoints or your middleware or a function, your tasks, and even your triggers. And in this example, what we have here is an endpoint that's connected with the pre-middleware. This pre-middleware, it creates a record in our default data table, and then it runs a custom function where we generate a random number. In our data table, under the default table that we're adding to, we can go to our triggers, and I have a trigger set. This trigger triggers when an item is added to the data table. So this system has a couple different pieces that are interconnected and all working as one, so that when we look at a request history, we should be able to see a bunch of things happen. Because this is an endpoint, I'm going to copy this endpoint URL and head to Postman, apply it here, and I'll go ahead and click send. It'll take a couple seconds, but everything's happening now through our function stack, and we get a response back, a 200 status. It took 5 seconds, and it's about a megabyte or a little bit more in size. If we head back to our endpoint, what we can do is we can take a look at our request history, or what happened when. We have the ability to look at our request history either in the top toolbar on the left-hand side, or the request history within the settings. You can go ahead and click those 3 little dots, open up the request history, and this panel slides out. At the very top, you have multiple filters to help you filter your request history by when it happened, by how long it happened, by the status code, 200s, 400s, etc., and by the input and output sizes. You also have this chart here that visualizes the last 24 hours of traffic that you've received or requests that you've received. For this endpoint in particular, we have the one that we had just made. So clicking on it, we have now identifying information at the top and this little tip or this little note that says, be careful because this information could be sensitive. Now we have our request details with copy buttons on the right-hand side and a curl if we're looking to go ahead and throw this into Postman and make it again, this request again. This curl would include all of our inputs as well. Now, you're also noticing this red notification that's saying that our megabyte size of our output is too big to display within this request history. The threshold's 10 kilobytes, so it's not recorded. But what is recorded is the actual logic route, or the route that the logic took. And what we can see, we're shown that this is only recording the first 10,000 entries. And, well, underneath, we see our pre-middleware trigger. Our pre-middleware, it runs through all of that, runs through what it needs to, and then it triggers the random number. After that, we then start our logic within our function stack, where we're dealing with 14,710 different statements. You can see that, well, we only have 9 here and then a 10th. So if we open it up, we have 9,975 more. So this is capped at 10,000 records. This is capped at a particular amount because within our settings, we have the ability to do so. After all, request history is still data that is stored to your data table. This here, this chart of 24 hours, well, it's not a coincidence it's 24 hours. It's because the request history deletes itself after 24 hours. After all, we don't want to go ahead and bog your system down with a bunch of request information and you run out of space, and that's no good. So what we have the option to do, and this is especially helpful if you are in an instance where you have a lot of traffic and you are low on storage, you can actually head to your instance dashboard here and you can reset a bit of information. So clicking on your instance card, you can click on this gear and you can click on the maintenance. You'll see this panel slide out. You have your request history and your database storage and cache storage. Your cache storage is temporary. This is actually where the records go first before then they're sent to your database storage. Clicking open your database storage, we have the ability to see that this information has recorded. We have, the data here and how many rows that it takes up. And we have the ability to delete it as well by clicking the checkbox. And this force option, it ensures that all processes are stopped so that the history is cleared out entirely. Clicking this clear history button, we can go ahead and just go ahead and clear it. Takes a couple moments, but then if we head back into our endpoint and on this blue bar, click the refresh button, we can see that we have no history again. Let's go ahead and trigger this one more time because our request history doesn't just stop at our API endpoint. It can be any action, as I had shown, and also as in our instance panel had shown as well, we have tasks, functions, etc. So I'll refresh this history, I have my new record here, and I'll be able to click in and I can see, yep, everything here has been recorded and logged. I can also then go into my pre-middleware or my middleware context, and I can see its request history too. I can access it via the toolbar or within the settings again, and doing so, I have a panel that slides out, the same filters, the same chart, and the ability to see the record. Now, in this instance, and in this particular context, it's of the middleware. So we see the IP address lookup, the record being added, then the random number. Perfect, so that's working. We can also then go into our custom function context and do the same by clicking on our request history button. We can locate our record and we can click it open, and we see that in our function stack, our random number was generated. So you can see as we get more narrow, the stack trace or the logic route, it reflects that. It reflects the context of where we're looking for a request history. Additionally, we can go to our data table and we can go ahead and head to our triggers to that particular trigger, and we can also access its request history to see what happened when. Perfect. Now, of course, we have the ability to see all of this information and the ability to remove it if it gets too chaotic and too cluttered, but what if we didn't necessarily want to have to remove it? What if we just wanted to limit the amount that's recorded? You can do so in your settings. You can click this gear in the bottom left, and then in the top right, click these three dots and select Branch Defaults. The Branch Defaults, this panel slides open and you get to see your request history and all of the items that you can go ahead and modify. Your functions, middleware, queries, triggers, and tasks here, they're enabled. And on the right-hand side, you have the ability to select how many statements are recorded. Perhaps we don't want any statements recorded, but we at least want a log of if that endpoint or if that function was triggered, etc. So you have the ability to control it from either no statements to all statements. This allows us just a little bit more granular control. So you have the ability to hopefully debug and troubleshoot your logic that much more easily. Now, very lastly, what happens if you don't want to lose your request history after 24 hours? Because that could be a real concern, and you might work in an industry or be in a particular situation where you need to store your request history. If we open up that request history panel, you see this blue bar here. This blue bar is useful for refreshing, but it's also useful for exporting your data as well. You can export the data and it exports as a CSV, and you can also include your request output, but be mindful because it can significantly change the size of the export and take longer. You also have the means of using the metadata API. So what I've done is I've created a function of the metadata API. I've used this instance's API key, and so this endpoint in particular is looking at my workspace's ID's request history. There are other parameters you can add, but just as a simple demo, if you are looking to go ahead and take this information, you can run this endpoint and then save this information to a database that doesn't delete every 24 hours. So you have the ability to use request history, locate it, know what it is, and do stuff with it. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave those in the comment section below. You can also reach out to us within your instance on the left-hand side by clicking the support icon. And you can also, of course, reach out to us in the community. Thanks, and have a good one.